The difference between timber framing and post and beam construction. What's the difference between timber framing and post and beam? It's the connections. But there's more to it than that. We'll break it down so you can easily understand these two methods of building with heavy timbers. Let's get started. Timber framing is a construction method used for centuries in Europe and Japan. Craftsmen use traditional methods of wood joinery to fit together large, typically squared timbers. The connections were carved by hand to join every piece of wood with joinery similar to fine furniture instead of with metal fasteners or glue. One example of a timber frame connection is a mortise and tenon joint. When the connection is made, it is done with wooden pegs. Metal is rarely used in timber framing. The wooden pegs are visible at the joints, so seeing them is a good indication that a structure is timber framed. Although it may seem simple, cutting and fitting traditional joinery is both time-consuming and requires a high skill level. By contrast, post and beam does not involve mortise and tenon joinery. Although it uses heavy timbers, the connections are much less complicated. Metal fasteners like screws, bolts, and plates are used to connect the timber pieces. Sometimes the connections are reinforced and decorated with metal plates. Other times, the connectors are hidden, so the structure looks very similar to timber frame structures. These simpler connections usually require less time to craft than the traditional methods. Both timber frame and post and beam construction use durable heavy timbers, as opposed to dimensional lumber that can be purchased from any lumber yard. Dimensional lumber is cut to predefined standard sizes, such as 2x4s. The heavy timbers used in both post and beam and timber framing are much larger and generally remain exposed in the building. This creates an honest expression of the structure, which gives it a sturdy appearance. When designed and constructed with care and skill, the beauty of the frame itself creates the artistic character of the building. The organic beauty of wood is celebrated in the exposed timber work, whether post and beam or timber frame. Timber frame and post and beam share several similarities. In both methods, the structural frame is self-supporting and carries the weight of the building. This means that interior load-bearing walls are unnecessary, which makes large open interior spaces and high vaulted ceilings possible. They are usually prefabricated in a sheltered environment, labeled, and delivered to the job site where they can be quickly raised. Both are sustainable methods of construction. They often reuse wood from existing structures or harvest it from standing dead forest. And, because of how the timbers are assembled, they can be easily disassembled and repurposed in a future building. Now for some of the major differences. The main difference between these two systems is the way the timbers are joined. Timber frames date back to medieval times and use traditional joinery instead of metal parts. This method is so robust that there are still original structures built several hundred years ago that are still standing today. In post and beam buildings, instead of traditional joinery, the timbers are connected with metal fasteners. The fasteners securing the timbers may be hidden within connections or exposed and decorative. The cost of skilled labor to cut and fit the joints is much higher in a timber frame structure. However, the metal connectors in a post and beam building can add up to be a significant cost factor. Finally, the raising process is different for a timber frame than for a post and beam building. The sections of the timber frame are assembled on the ground and then erected as a bent until the entire framework is completed. Rigging is minimal, as the joinery can support pieces temporarily until the pegs are added. With post and beam construction, the frame is built from the ground up, with the parts being added on top of each other. A significant amount of rigging is necessary to hold every piece in place since there is no joinery to aid in alignment. To more easily identify timber framing from post and beam construction, let's dig into their specific characteristics. We'll start with the characteristics of timber frames. The traditional joinery in a timber frame is complex and sometimes must be engineered to deal with loads generated at different locations within a building. A timber frame structure relies on tight-fitting joinery, the integrity of the materials, and critical geometry to create a self-supporting building. This joinery requires precision and must be done by trained craftsmen or with the help of high-tech tools like CNC machines. Timber frames are designed and built as standalone structures without any additional frame support. The exposed frame determines the style and the aesthetics of the building. Timber frames are held together using wooden pegs that draw them together when driven into holes in the joint. Moving on to post and beam. Post and beam frames can be both structural and ornamental. The metal connectors can be completely hidden within the frame or exposed and decorative. Post and beam structures give the designer freedom in developing both interior and exterior space. Post and beam look similar to timber frame since the size of the timbers is similar. Labor cost is less since it does not use complex joinery. In the erection of a post and beam building, the frame, wall, and roof components are assembled in succession. Post and beam frames are usually used in conjunction with additional structural elements, such as shear panels and infill framing to create a secure building. With these characteristics in mind, let's move on to the advantages and disadvantages of timber framing versus post and beam construction. The advantages of timber framing include a more artistic and elegant structure than most post and beam designs, traditional wood-to-wood joinery. If kept dry, it can last for generations. Traditional wood joinery is flexible, meaning it can deflect and move a bit under loads without failing. Just remember that traditional joinery may require more skill to fabricate, which results in higher labor cost. As for the advantages of post and beam frames can be both structural and ornamental. The metal connectors can be completely hidden within the frame or exposed and decorative. On the other hand, if moisture condenses on steel surfaces, they can rust and cause the adjacent wood to decay. If the metal connector plates are complex, these elements can markedly increase material cost. Disparate materials such as metal connectors and wood beams can work loose over time. Overall, timber framing and post and beam construction both demand tight, well-crafted joints, but post and beam fabrication is usually less labor-intensive, which in turn makes it cheaper. Timber framing can add 25% over the cost of a stick-built home and 10 to 15% more than a comparable post and beam construction. The main factor often comes down to weighing your appreciation for traditional craftsmanship versus cost. Post and beam construction and timber framing both celebrate the beauty of wood, but post and beam breaks from the pure traditional joinery of timber framing. No matter which approach you choose, building with large timber encourages personal design choices and gives you the freedom to showcase either a handmade and rustic look or a more sleek and modern appearance. For more on the subject, head over to timberframehq.com. It's packed with resources, tips, and tools for your next project. You can even collect 3 free plans, plus 20% off any plan or plan bundle on the site as a thanks for visiting for a limited time. For detailed plans, custom design, engineering services, or the whole timber frame cut and delivered, contact us at Timberframe HQ.